Hello, and welcome to episode 132 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Steven Gaffney, president of the Steven Gaffney Company. He is the leading expert on open, honest communication and is the author of 4 books: Honesty Works, Real World Solutions to Common Problems at Home and Work; Be a Change Champion, Mastering Momentum; Honesty Sells, How to Make More Money and Increase Business Profits; and his 4th book is Just Be Honest, Authentic Communication Strategies that Get Results and Last a Lifetime. Steven, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Excellent. Glad to have you. The first question I'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, hopefully it's based on the work I do, which is all around open, honest communication. Because here's what I found out. That the number one problem in people's life with relationships and teams and organizations is actually what just doesn't get said. I call that honest communication. But people, when they typically hear me talk about it, initially they're thinking I'm going down the path of ethics, that people are big liars. But that's really not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is what just doesn't get said. So how I think I'm helping out the community and the world, hopefully, is by actually helping people realize that the number one problem in relationships is essentially what just didn't get said. So if you get that unsaid said, you can actually make so many relationships so much better, and actually in organizations improve the bottom line.
So have you ever, so in thinking about articulating what often isn't said, I'm wondering about tact, right? So what's the difference between being tactless and saying what often isn't being said, and might that result in someone being fired or in a relationship ending? Why is it that you're saying that saying what often isn't being said is a positive thing, and as opposed to keeping it quiet and being tactful, or is that a false dichotomy?
Well, see, here's the challenge. You can't solve a problem that nobody tells you about. And you can't use an idea that nobody shares with you. So you can't solve a problem, Jordan, unless somebody tells you what that problem is. You can't read people's mind.
Right.
And you can't use somebody's idea if they don't tell you. If I have a great idea for you, but I never tell you, you can't use it. So that actually impacts innovation, creativity.
Right.
So this is what really I deal with, because people worry way, way, way too much about being tactful. Of course you've got to be tactful, right? There's a difference between honesty and brutality.
Right.
But I'm just trying to get people to realize, listen, you keep something inside, it's never going to work out.
Right.
So even at home, what happens is that people don't share really what's going on. And they don't share really the difficult challenges. But you know what else is fascinating? People also don't share the good stuff. They don't share their appreciation for each other. So I'm not trying to be like, all soft here, but what I'm trying to have you, not you in particular realize, but people have become aware of is that people spend way too much about like tone and attitude, which is all really important. But the biggest mover is just what didn't get said. You can look at the political landscape, you can look at organizations, you can look at how CEOs handle things, and what happens is what gets people in trouble is when they don't share things that they probably should have shared. Here's another thing to consider. Bad news about us is always better coming from us than if somebody else discovers it. So I deal with an area called proactive honesty, and there's 3 levels of honesty we can go into, but most people don't even do the bare minimum, and if they do, they're in the reactive honesty, which really is, if I ask you a question, you'll tell me the answer, but if you don't ask, I never tell you.
Right.
And that isn't good enough.
So sounds like there's the truth, and then there's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And you would prefer that people select the latter option as a means of improving communication and therefore improving results, especially in the business world.
Well, yeah, because think about it this way. And of course, I don't want to oversimplify things, because there are things that, the difference again between honesty and brutality. But I mean, people really need to realize that how prevalent this issue is. Just think about this. How often have you thought to yourself, I wish they would have told me. If they had told me, I could have done a lot better job. People listening probably at work, they're thinking, if my boss had just told me, or somebody who's a leader has just said, if my employees had just told me what the problem was.
Right.
Or how about this really simple issue? Somebody's mad at you, but they don't tell you, they tell everybody else.
Right.
And they poison your reputation. And you're like, why didn't they just tell me first?
And you could have fixed it.
Exactly.
Right.
So many problems in life can be fixed. So, for example, I've had I had a lady who walked out of my session. I didn't even privately coach her. She just attended my session. And she had an estranged relationship with her mother for 10 years. Hadn't talked to her mother for 2 years. Walked out of the session, used what I taught, and actually fixed the entire relationship.
Wow.
I had another gentleman I ran into who had took my seminar a long time ago. And he said and he told me how he confronted his father, who's an alcoholic, and hadn't had a drink since. Now, those are major results. But how can people produce those results? Because they're focused on what just didn't get said.
So how is it that you, Steven, were able to become such a guru in honesty? What is it that first, I guess, when did you have the epiphany that this was really the major problem that was standing in between many individuals and the goals they wanted to achieve?
I'd like to say, Jordan, I always knew this was going to happen. I had no clue it was going to happen. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always the one that people are going to hear this and think I'm weird, but I would tell on myself. So, as a little kid, like you might dent the coffee table, I would go up to my parents and tell on myself.
Yeah.
Now, my brother and my sister didn't have that same methodology, so, and I'm not sure if that was really good because then you get punished. Or whatever.
How did that work out for you?
Yeah, it was kind of tough, but no, my parents were really great about it. But I've always had that within me. So then what happened is, I had, got out of college and I could explain the whole sequence of events, but essentially what one day happened is I was an agent for film and radio and photographers. Basically, I would find photographers' work. And I did a seminar for photographers, and I really liked doing that. But it was on basic communication and motivation. So I would do these seminars on the side, and then my business partner wanted the business for herself. In other words, being an agent for photographers. And so I started to launch my seminar business, but I didn't really know so much what I was doing. But the big breakthrough came when a graphic designer heard me speak. She went home to her husband, who worked for IBM, and said, "You should bring in this guy." But so that's how I started moving into communication and motivation. And as I got into this, it's filled. There's so many wonderful people that do a lot of great work.
Right.
But what I realized by people and by working with them is I kind of uncovered really what it was honesty. And I was naturally good at being upfront. So people would come to me for advice and say, yeah, you're talking about this communication, but how about the honesty part? So it morphed into this honesty. And then the more I got into it and the more I dealt with major organizations, I realized this is the problem. And so really a problem.
How do you define honesty and integrity? There's so many different definitions. As you say, there are different permutations of the truth and of honesty. Integrity, sometimes there's a definition of being whole in both thought, speech, and in action. What is honesty and integrity, and how is it that you address those topics in your lectures?
Well, the way I deal with integrity is keeping your word. In other words, doing what you say you're going to do. Honesty is about you sharing what needs to get said. Now, therein lies the tricky part. Because some people say, well, I didn't need to say that because it's just going to hurt somebody's feelings. Right. But I don't know if you've ever had somebody do this. Not share with you something because they didn't want to hurt your feelings.
It ends up hurting you more.
Exactly. I'd much rather know and be able to deal with that. So what I like people to consider is there's 3 levels of honesty. And this is where you really get into where the problem is and also the solution. And I somewhat addressed this earlier, but now I'm going to get into it. 3 levels. The first level is reactive honesty. This is where most organizations lie at best, where you ask an employee a question and they tell you the answer. But the rationale is, if you didn't ask me, I didn't tell you because you never asked. Right. So I get off the hook. You can see the problem with that. Next level up is proactive honesty. That's where, Jordan, let's say you and I are working together, and I say to you, essentially, Jordan, I'm sensing a problem, and I want to let you know on this program or this contract, I want to give you a heads up, we're having a potential problem here. So you're not even aware of it. I'm proactively bringing it up. Right. The gold standard is what I call foreshadowing honesty.
Interesting.
Foreshadowing honesty, Jordan, that's where there isn't an immediate problem I can be proactive about, but I'm seeing down the road it could be a potential problem, and I'm flagging you. Right. When people feel very safe, they will actually attain all 3 levels. And what I work with organizations is actually to get to that 3rd level, because that's where you can become very profitable and you can really help business growth just take off.
So, just imagining different scenarios. I don't have any data on this, but I imagine a great proportion of people in the workforce are in the workforce in order to get their paycheck. Yet there seems to be a desire on the part of employers to believe as though their employees are not there for the money, but because they really love the mission of the organization, and there's nothing they'd rather do in their life than show up to work at 9 a.m. and leave at 5. So if you were able to talk to those employees and actually find out, well, I don't really like the work, but the economy is terrible. I don't really have many other options. I have to pay my mortgage and feed my kids. So that's why I have the job. Then from the employer's perspective, like, well, this guy isn't that into it. Maybe I'm going to fire him and replace him with someone who is more interested in the job. And that would obviously be a terrible outcome for the individual who is honest. So how do you approach that kind of situation?
Well, here's the good news is, Jordan, and I challenge your premise because my experience having worked with all these major organizations, which includes, like, I work with the Marines, the Air Force, I've worked with Defense Logistics Agency, which is the supply chain for the U.S. military. Right. I work with Marriott, which is the number one hotel chain in the world. I work with Barrick, which is the number one gold producer company in the world. These all have been clients of mine, and Lockheed has been a big client of mine, all this stuff. Most of these employees are actually trying to do the best job they can. They actually do like their work if their boss or their organization will allow them to do the job they want to do. So most people are coming to work not for a paycheck. They really are coming because they want to do a great job. I'm not naive. I do know some people are just getting a paycheck and because of where the economy is and whatever, but the economy is improving. Right. And so what I'm actually working with organizations on, retention is going to be an issue of your highest employees because the ones who are high performers can leave. Right.
So they'll be picked off by other organizations.
Oh, yeah. You know what? A client of mine said this once, and I loved it. Her biggest fear was the rise of the mediocre. The rise of the mediocre. And I said, Jordan, to her, what are you talking about? And she said, the rise of the mediocre is this. My biggest fear is that that people who can leave will leave, and I don't want them to leave. And what I will be left with is the mediocre people who can't get another job. Yeah. So actually, we want to hire people who could leave us, but actually choose to stay with us because they love the work. So I work with leaders. Yeah. And how do you create that environment where people are beyond engagement? Engagement's old school. People are like, you got to have your employees engaged. You want to have a proactive, mosaic workforce where everybody sees that they're part of the big picture. And you can create that. And part of that is by having honest dialogue because employees, when they feel frustrated, they want to share with their boss, look, I'm trying to do a good job, but this is stifling my growth and what I can do to contribute. So if you can have that open dialogue, leaders can take that information and change the company in the direction that improves the overall performance. And that's what I'm after.
So individuals high-performing individuals would rather be at an organization that does practice foreshadowing honesty.
Absolutely.
That'd create a more wholesome environment and would lead to better employee retention?
Absolutely, because here's what happens is a lot of employees are sitting there going, and my boss telling me the truth. Are they really saying what needs to get said? Right. And unfortunately, we watch all kinds of situations and people question the trust of leadership sometimes. Right. And the thing is, they want to know that their boss is not only going to just tell them when, to react to a situation, not only just be proactive, but actually foreshadow. I mean, wouldn't you want to work for an organization that says, hey, Jordan, listen, we might have some rocky roads ahead. We don't now, but we might. So here's what we're going to do to make some changes so we're successful now. You'd much rather have that than a company that says, well, we didn't want to tell you, but we're now going to have to make some layoffs, which a lot of companies end up doing, which breaks the trust of employees.
So could you speak a little bit to our listeners about how you've learned so much about what constitutes corporate culture and what employees in the American labor force actually do desire? How did you learn about these trends and what kind of data do you have to support the conclusions that really that again support your methodology?
Well, so there's a lot of research out there, but let me give you one interesting statistic as an example. Dr. Will Schutz did some work out of California, and he wrote a book called The Human Element, and he subsequently has passed away, but he did a lot of work in this area around honest communication and open communication. He found out that 80% of workplace problems, 80% are sourced back to lack of open, honest communication. So that's a staggering statistic because what that means is 8 out of every 10 problems at work are sourced back to lack of open, honest communication. Let's take a very simple problem. Somebody leaves the company, and you find out the real reason why they left, and you think, wait a minute, if I had just known that was the issue, I could have fixed it.
Right.
Because actually most employees don't leave a company because of money. They leave a company because of their boss.
Right.
And so you can change that. So the kind of culture you want to create is that open, honest communication. And what I've discovered by working with all these executives is when you do this, performance takes off. This is why I work with some of the best companies in the world, because, Jordan, they realize that honest communication is not easy to do. So it isn't easy.
So we've spoken about the definition of integrity, which is keeping your word, and the 3 levels of honesty: reactive, proactive, and foreshadowing. Honesty being telling the truth. So, and many of our listeners may be listening to this and say, look, I'm on board. I love the idea of having more integrity and honesty, but I'm wondering how to strike a balance with being tactful without being brutal. Can you define what it is to be tactful and how someone can walk that line without being brutal, and so therefore being still tactful, but while being able to become more honest?
So the key way to deliver honest communication is to have it be a fact-based conversation, not opinion-based. So let me explain kind of the overall difference. An opinion-based conversation is where somebody says, well, you don't respect me. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Or you don't care. Yes, I do. No, you don't. All we're doing is arguing opinions.
Right.
Versus me saying, Jordan, I noticed I sent you an email and I didn't get an email response back. What's going on? See, what happens is people don't be fact-based what the issue is. They just espouse opinions.
Right.
I mean, look at what happens in people's home life and work life where things are going south. What happens is people either aren't sharing what needs to get said, or they're just sharing a whole bunch of opinions. In fact, what are the facts? So here's the key elements of an open, honest communication. There are really 3 elements that people want to focus on. One is to begin the conversation with it being fact-based. So what are the facts around the situation?
Right.
Then you want to make a request. What are you asking for? Now, this sounds simple, Jordan, but a lot of times somebody will say, well, I'm just dumping a problem on my boss. They don't give them a solution. Or have you ever had somebody be upset with you and you're like, okay, what do you want? Well, I don't know. You figure it out. And you're like, that doesn't help me.
So a lot of time people are venting their frustration without proposing a solution.
Absolutely. So if it's fact-based, not opinion-based,
right.
If then they make a request, and then here's where the gold is, framing the request by what's in it for the other person. So often somebody will go to their boss or coworker and say what they need from their vantage point. Instead of thinking, what's in it for my boss? Why would my boss care? And actually setting up a request on how it would make a difference in the other person's life. So let's put it all together. So let's say I say, Jordan, listen, I noticed I sent you a couple of emails and you haven't responded. And I just want to find out what's going on because I really want to improve things because obviously we're working on this project together. And it's going to help me be able to deliver and give you the information if we're able to improve our communication.
Right.
So how can I help you out?
Right.
See, that's much better than me saying, Jordan, I just want to be upfront with you. You're not respecting me. I'm working hard here and I never hear from you.
Yeah.
See the difference?
Right. So the first one is if you respond to my emails, then we'll have more open communication. We'll be able to do our work better. The second is a blame game and just makes the other person feel bad and doesn't lead to actual productive outcomes.
Absolutely. I do a lot of work around this fact-based conversation because it actually is transformative in organizations. And so often somebody will share with me an issue and I'll say, what are the facts around the situation? And Jordan, what's weird is people can't even recall some of the facts. In fact, right now, as people are listening, think about a problem you have right now. Somebody is frustrating you. And ask yourself, what are just the facts around the situation? Take a piece of paper and split it apart between facts and opinions. And I challenge you, you probably aren't going to come up with a lot of opinions. You'll come up with a few opinions and a whole bunch of opinions. A few facts and a whole bunch of opinions. And people just take off with the opinions instead of being fact-based.
Your business offers a lifetime guarantee to individuals who attend your conferences or get your coaching. And basically, can you speak about what the guarantee is? Because I think it's unique in the industry.
It is.
And can you talk a little bit about how many people have ever taken you up on it?
Well, I'm very proud of this because I don't know if there's anybody else that offers it. And here's the guarantee. That whenever they take one of my sessions, whatever I teach them, if they ever forget how to use it or they're not sure of that application or something's messed up with that application, they can call related to whatever I taught them.
Right.
They can call unlimited amounts.
How many times do people call?
Well, their answer is rarely, because often people are taking and they see exactly what to do. I mean, just yesterday I was doing a session and somebody was sharing about a very personal problem at home. And in her case, I said, look, just tell me by the end of the session if you don't see how to resolve it. By the end of the session, she saw how to resolve it. I've had people who have applied this in all kinds of ways, but it's an open invitation. We're very encouraging on that. But the answer is we don't get that many calls because people really see how to use it. Because here's what I do differently. In my sessions, I have them choose a case study that's currently happening in their life. I don't give them a case study. I have them work through it. So I have them choose the most difficult, challenging person they have in their life. And then I show them exactly how to resolve it. So when they leave, they know how to use it. They're not wondering, because see, if I gave them a case study, they would say, oh, that's nice, but how do I use it? If they choose a challenging
they apply your lessons to their own life.
Yeah, and they're using it in the session and in the work. We're always working on real life issues.
So I'd like to transition to entrepreneurship. Many individuals listening may say, look, I'm sold. I feel like I also am a person with integrity. I like to be honest. I'm a direct communicator. But I'm in this job, trying to get photographers gigs or something like that. And, I'd love to be a lecturer. How is it, and you spoke about how organically you were kind of pushed out by a partner and you had to go and make your own way, and then you were able to get lucky and you had a referral, but you built it. Somehow you were able to write these books. You were able to gain insights about corporate culture. You were able to develop lesson plans in real substance, lecture material. You're able to develop seminars that are now attracting, because anyone can say, really, I know about honesty, but it's something else to really have major Fortune 500 companies really desire you and for you to become the leading expert in open, honest communication in the world. So for our listeners' benefit, can you speak about entrepreneurship and how it is that you tread this path to become as successful as you have been?
Well, sometimes actually it's better to not know what's about to happen and just do it, because I look back at all the trials and tribulations. And it's very challenging as far as you creating your own business, but it's also very rewarding. I mean, I'm very, very thankful, lucky, and feeling blessed of what's happened. So people are trying to decide, well, I'd like to start my own business. What do they do? Let me give you the two most important things. You got to think about what you love to do and what you're good at. And that's your North Star. So as chaotic and as organic as it was, if you really think about it, and I've thought about this too, Jordan, my whole life, I've actually been naturally good at honesty. It just kind of came good at it. Now, it doesn't mean, I was great at it, knew all these distinctions, which I'm giving now. I mean, this is, I've worked at this, really hard at this. But I've always, that's been natural for me. And I also love helping people. So that kind of has been my guiding principle. So when you look back at my life, although I've done different things, the thread is, what do I love to do and what am I good at? So you know what? I still use this today. When I'm even deciding about what markets to hit and what new products and services and what book I'm going to write next, it's really, what do I love to do and what am I good at? Not, how can I make money? Because if you have money as the driver, you're just going to always be chasing different opportunities. And I see so many people squander different opportunities because they're just focused on the money. But if you focus on what do I love to do and what am I good at, you actually will excel, and then you can make a lot of money doing it.
So what do you think accounts for you loving to help people?
It's a good question. It's just always been there. And I actually think for the most part, my experience is down deep, everybody wants to help out other people. Now, I know there's some selfish people in this world, but I think people really day in and day out are just trying to do a really great job and they want to help people. So I just found an avenue that can help people. But you know what? There are people every day that are working at all levels and all organizations and even factory workers and everything else. They're doing their job and they're helping people. In this case, they might be helping their family through a paycheck or whatever, but they're all trying to help and contribute to other people and what they're up to in their life.
So I'd like to use this opportunity as we approach the end of the podcast to ask you a final question, which is to reflect upon your life within the context of how you've been helping people. Why have you been so interested in advancing the public interest as you see it, which is, in your case, it seems like, to really enable people to be better communicators in the workplace and in their home life environment? And then what do you hope the legacy will be at the end of your career after you've gone to more seminars and you've written more books and you've further fleshed out this material? What will be the legacy of all of these seminars and all of your life in trying to advance the public interest?
Well, first of all, I think, again, when it comes to communication, and you really look at it, hard skills, soft skills. The soft skills, the communication part, is the really way to make a difference. And that's what excites me, and that's really what I want to help people with.
Right.
And I hope my legacy is, when I'm gone, is that people will say he really advanced open, honest communication. I never really thought about it. But most importantly, what I hope people are left with is actually the work has made a huge difference in their lives. Because when it's all said and done, where we really look back, it's the quality of our life. Has everything to do with the quality of our relationships. One way to consider this is this: no matter how, let's say let's turn it to a positive. We live a normal, healthy life. We're going to look back at our life and we will spend more time with people that we work with. And so relationships at work are really important, and relationships at home. It's all about the relationships.
So that has been Steven Gaffney, president of the Steven Gaffney Company, the leading expert on open, honest communication, and the author of 4 books: Honesty Works, Be a Change Champion, Honesty Sells, and Just Be Honest. Steven speaks about basically being guided throughout his life of doing what he loves and doing what he's good at. And he loves helping people, and he's good at honesty. And he's been able to combine those two as an entrepreneur to build a business that's really geared towards helping people. He speaks about trying to enable people to communicate better, and his form of public service is to really, he really, his face smiles, he glows when he speaks about these anecdotes of how his course has had a positive effect on his students. For him, he's had the opportunity to meet many global leaders, a lot of interesting people, but the stories that really stick out in his mind, the ones that he chooses to share, the ones that really let him know that he's having an impact on the world, are the stories of how someone was able to be reconciled with their mother or father, or how someone was able to really go into work and become more productive and be retained, and then see how the companies are really able to make their bottom line, but more importantly, promote employee satisfaction. So for Steven, it's the impact of his work, the positive impact on people's lives, with concrete examples that really make it all worthwhile for him as he seeks to advance the public interest by being the leading expert on open, honest communication. Steven, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Can I add one last thing?
Sure.
So if people go out and use what they taught or what we just discussed, and they send me an email, or they send you an email and you forward it to me, I will send them free the first book I wrote called Just Be Honest. It'll be the electronic version, but I'll send that to them for free because I really want to encourage people to get out and do stuff with what they're hearing and what we went through today.
And what is your email address?
It's Steven@StevenGaffney.com. So STEVEN at Steven Gaffney, the name of the company, STEVENGAFF as in Frank, NEY.com.
So, listeners, you're welcome to contact Mr. Gaffney. Again, this has been episode 132 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Remember to subscribe at publicinterestpodcast.com. Listen on iTunes, podcast app, Stitcher, Blueberry, a ton of other SoundCloud, other podcast applications. And should you wish to leave a voicemail for Steven, you're welcome to call the number listed on the Contact Us page of the website. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.